wonderful time as we begin to discuss a topical issue as usual of us. This webinar today is brought to us by Ubosi and Company. And today we'll be having a topic that we're going to be discussing. But before then, I'd like to ask you to grab the pen and invite as many as possible to join this webinar, because we're going on a journey that is going to be exciting to everybody who is joining this webinar. If you have questions, we're going to have privilege to take some questions. We can have the privilege of promoting one or two persons to ask their questions if need be. And so please indicate and use the chat box to ask your questions and to raise your hands if need be. Without further ado, I would like to let all of us know that we're starting right now, and the topic we're going to be discussing today is reinvigorating Nigeria's economic potential with debt capital. And there's no other person who is going to be doing justice to this topic other than our principal partner in person of Mr. Chudi Ubosi. And so right now, I'd like to welcome our principal partner who is going to be talking and discussing with us. And like I said earlier on, please get ready with your questions. If you have any of them, if you want to be promoted to ask one or two questions, we'll give you the privilege to do so. And so welcome to this webinar. And I'm sure that by the end of this webinar, you have reasons to smile and be happy that we have this webinar. Mr. Chudi Ubosi, you're welcome, and thank you. It's your pleasure. Mr. Chudi, are you there? I want to assume you can hear me. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, sir. Please, can you?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. The screen is blank. I'm not sure if... good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to webinar for the month of April, for the month of March. Today we're looking at a topic that is titled Reinvigorating Nigeria's. We're looking at a topic that is titled Reinvigorating Nigeria's Economic Potential with Debt Capital. And I'm going to be speaking for a few minutes on this very interesting topic. And I hope that by the time we're through, we would understand that there is a lot of potential that the country is wasting in terms of debt capital. So can I have the first slide, please? So we start off with the introduction. We're talking about debt capital. As many of us would know, trillions of Naira, trillions of assets, and trillions of Naira lie dormant in idle assets across Nigeria. And they represent a major drain in terms of underperformance and the nation's economic potential. These assets come in different forms: underutilized infrastructure, underutilized items of plant and machinery, unclaimed financial instruments. Many of us would remember that in terms of dividends that are currently unclaimed from the Nigerian Stock Exchange and so on, are in the value of trillions of Naira. And then the major thing about dead capital is unproductive land. And at a period like this in our country's history, where the government is grouping at everything possible to increase the revenue and to as much as possible make every asset as efficient as possible, unlocking the dead capital, unlocking the value that is trapped in a lot of these assets is no longer an option, but is now a necessity, is now an imperative. And that's why we have chosen this topic, because as you go along, you will see where a lot of these things fall in place, and I'll be able to explain to you how indeed there's so much potential, there's so much that the government is not making use of. But let me quickly, before we go into the meat of the topic, let me talk about dead capital. The term dead capital comes from the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto, and it refers to assets that hold economic potential, or that hold economic value, that have a lot of potential economic value, but are locked away and are unable to contribute to the formal economy of the country. So let's look at it this way. Imagine a chest full of gold, a treasure chest full of gold buried deep in the ground. It has value, but it's useless. It's useless to everybody unless it can be assessed. You may have, it's also like petroleum oil as we know it. It's there deep in the ground, but unless this oil is brought to the surface, it's processed and value added, it's dead to, it basically forms dead capital for everyone. So dead capital, or Hernando Soto, theorizes that assets are locked away. For example, land is locked away because it has no title. And because we're a real estate company, because our sessions are mainly geared towards the real estate industry, I'm going to speak a lot. A lot of my talk would be based on real estate. So Hernando Soto theorizes that, look, every one of us as individuals come from a town, from a village. Actually, and we know that in Nigeria too, we all come from towns, we all come from villages. And as you are born, your father or your uncles and so on, there's a family land, and as you're born, some portion of that family land is immediately demarcated as your own. You probably will not be able to use it until you come into adulthood. But Hernando Soto's theory in his book, The Mystery of Capital, is that every one of us, every individual, not just in Nigeria, all over the world, actually in a lot of the African countries, the South American countries, and so on, everybody has access to some piece of real estate. But then the problem that makes that real estate dead is because there's no title. The ownership is held informally, and it cannot be used for any economic development. These dead assets cannot generate economic value due to factors like unclear property rights, due to factors like inefficient legal systems, due to factors lack of title. A lack of title makes your land your land holding is informal. lack of title makes it even difficult for you to use that land to have access to financial resources. And so this is a theory that Hernandez Soto has come up with and says and theorizes that it is dead capital. That's where we're coming from this morning as we talk about dead capital. And I've just spoken about dead capital in the theory based on the individual. Now, as a nation in Nigeria, let me give you a little bit of data regarding what dead capital is. Nigeria as a nation has a lot of dead capital scattered all over the country. Not all over the country, including outside the country. And I'll give you some statistics that will probably wow you this morning. The first thing is that based on a 2022 report by the Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors, a 2022 report, research that was done, the country, Nigeria, has has 56,000 abandoned projects. 56,000 abandoned projects all over the nation. That is what Nigeria has. And this is based on a study by the Nigerian Institution of Estate Survey, by the Nigerian Institute of Quantity Surveyors. 56,000 abandoned projects within the states and by the federal government. And the breakdown is equally interesting. In Abuja, you have about 2,000 projects that are abandoned. In the Northwest, you have about 7,000. In the Northeast, you have about 7,000. In the Southwest, you have about 15,000 projects. In North Central, you have about 5,000 projects. In the Southeast, you have about 10,000 projects. So we can see the huge amount of monies and resources that have been invested into these projects and have become abandoned by virtue of the fact that the government's lack of continuity in governance, or just the lack of financial resources to complete them, or even lack of proper conceptualization of these projects. But because the mere fact that they have been started means that resources have been buried into them. And the mere fact that they have also been abandoned means that this is dead capital. The projects are there, they cannot be completed. You can't go forward and you can't go backwards. It forms a huge amount of dead capital. And really, as we go towards the end of this show, it's important that the government begins to look for ways to get out of a lot of these projects and use the income from them to reinvigorate the economy. A few more things on dead capital. Many Nigerians would be surprised to know that Nigeria has over 700 properties outside Nigeria. Yes, Nigeria owns in excess of 700 real estate properties outside Nigeria, used by our diplomatic missions, our embassies. But again, as many of us know, most of these assets are most likely abandoned or underutilized. Many are not being used maximally. These again form a major source of dead capital for the nation. There are also numerous parastatals. There are numerous government-funded MDAs and organizations that are very seriously underperforming. Every year, there are votes. There are financial votes in the budget for some of these parastatals and organizations. And they take these monies and we really can't see what it is what value they're adding to the system. This again is some part of the fact that there's debt capital, and this where you have parastatals and companies and organizations underperforming. Then the one that many of us are very much used to, thousands, tens of thousands of road projects, tens of thousands of kilometers of road projects that have been abandoned. Many of us are, that is one that many of us are used to, tens of thousands of road projects that have been abandoned. These are projects, again, many have been started. They've been stopped halfway for lack of financial resources. Many have been abandoned because of poor conceptualization. Many are not going on because of community issues and so on. But the mere fact that the government has put money into these projects and cannot begin to extract value from them is very worrying and has a major impact on the concept of debt capital for the country. Now imagine where we are in Nigeria, we're saying that there are roads, there are tens of thousands of roads that are abandoned. This is a country that virtually every day we see pictures of roads that are in very bad shape and so on. And the reason why many of these roads are in that shape is because of the intensity of use. Of course, let's not add the issues of poor maintenance. Because of the intensity of use of these roads, they're overused and there's so much pressure on them. Damage is a lot more. But if maybe 50% of the abandoned roads that we have are then completed, the pressure on the current roads would be reduced. But again, that's part of the concept of this thing called debt capital. So I'm talking about debt capital in terms of, for us as individuals, we have land, we have assets that are not being used, but primarily for a lot of individuals, it is land that has no formal title, and you cannot use it for anything other than very formal things. You can farm on it, you can build your house on it, but yes, if you build a property on it, you can't do much more than that. You probably live in the property unchallenged. But if you had title, that property and the value therein can be unlocked for economic development. Now, Helena Soto, in his book, The Mystery of Capital, theorizes that the value of debt capital in the world, it's about $9.3 trillion. That is a huge sum of money. The value of debt capital in the world is about $9.3 trillion. And a further study that was undertaken by the firm of PwC Price Waterhouse states that in Nigeria, their own estimate is that in Nigeria and Nigerians are sitting on debt capital estimated at just under $1 trillion. Debt capital on just estimated at under $1 trillion. Imagine what 50% of that kind of money that is freed up into the system and used inside the economy. Imagine the economic impact it would have on the nation, Nigeria. So that's really a slight intro, and I go in terms of individuals and at our national level on the issue of how much debt capital we're all sitting on and we're all party to. Now, what is the state of affairs in Nigeria? What's the state of our affairs? Nigeria has 923,000 square kilometers of land. 923,000 square kilometers of land. Less than 10% of that land is titled. So what it means is that 90% of the 923,000 square kilometers of land in Nigeria is effectively debt capital. 90% of the 923,000 square kilometers of land in Nigeria is effectively debt capital. But we are not doing that badly when we look at countries like Mozambique, where where only 3% of land is titled. You look at it in a country like Namibia, 44% of land in Namibia is titled. In South Africa, 72% of land is titled. And beyond the work done by PwC in estimating the exact worth or the exact value of debt capital, there are a number of issues that have helped them. One, as I mentioned earlier, is the lack of clear property rights. The lack of clear property rights. That is a major problem in Nigeria. The lack of clear property rights remains a major problem in Nigeria. Informal land ownership. Informal land ownership is a major problem in Nigeria. What do I mean by informal land ownership? You have a plot of land, everybody knows that it is your land, nobody goes there, but there is no documentation, there's no CFO, there's no certificate of occupancy, there's no registered deed, there's no power of attorney, there's no statutory right of occupancy, some formal title, some formal document that vests ownership of that land in you, some formal document that enables you sell the land to be able to realize the value, some formal document that enables you even pass title to your children or to some other family member or to some organization if need be, some formal title that could also allow you, as it were, bring in that land as contribution. If you are going into a business, if you are going into some business partnership with other individuals or maybe the state government or maybe an organization, you could bring in your land as your equity contribution. And that would make you a joint owner of that business. But the point is that without some formal documentation, it's impossible for you to do that. Unregistered and unsurveyed land, also a challenge. Disputed boundaries. We all know that this issue of disputed boundaries in Nigeria is a major issue. There are always boundary wars. One community is battling another community over where their land starts and where their land begins. That in itself is part of the challenges that have created a lot of debt capital. The absence of a formal real estate market, a formal market. Yes, many would not understand what a formal market is, but a formal market means where you can go in and trade your land and buy and sell land and so on. And the absence of that formal market means that at the end of the day, all we're doing is talking to estate agents like ourselves when we want to sell and so on. But the major thing one of the major things, and we always call it the big elephant in the room, which has given rise and which has been part of the reason why there's so much debt capital in the nation, is the Land Use Act of 45 years ago, the Land Use Act, which vests land in the state and federal governments. And unfortunately, the state and the federal governments see this land more as a revenue head than a factor of production. Unfortunately, land should be a major factor in production, but the state governments to whom the land use decree has vested title see land as a revenue head, and very little is done to ease access to land. Very little is done to give major consideration to increasing land, to increasing formal ownership, to allocating land even to those who need, and so on. So that's the big elephant in the room, and that's one of the major things that has brought about the issue of debt capital in Nigeria. So now we've talked about the state of affairs, we've talked about debt capital. What can we do as we begin to look at rounding up? What can we do as a people and as a nation? How do we reinvigorate? What are the steps to freeing up debt capital? I want to say that truthfully, towards the end of the administration of the last president, and which the current president has also gone ahead with, they set up a body called the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. Ministry of Finance Incorporated. This is one of the major steps that the federal government is taking to free up debt capital in Nigeria. And the ministry's mandate is simple: identify and aggregate all the country's assets, wherever they may be. Identify, aggregate, put up a register, put up a list of assets, put a value to these assets, and determine with them, do we sell, do we keep them, do we renovate, do we manage them? Those are the mandates in a nutshell and in a very summarized form. That's the mandate of the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. So this ministry will be able to aggregate all the nation's assets and determine those that are no longer useful, determine those that are no longer needed, determine those that should be finished. Once they begin to do their work, a lot of debt capital in Nigeria will be freed up. A lot of debt capital in Nigeria will be freed up. And it's something that everybody is looking forward to. For those who have been following the establishment of the Ministry of Finance Incorporated, followed some of the seminars and workshops that have gone on. It's a ministry that will change the dynamics in terms of asset management, in terms of debt capital, in terms of just even understanding what Nigeria as a whole owns and what we do not own, in terms of even understanding what we need and what we don't need. The Ministry of Finance Incorporated will do so much to free up debt capital for Nigeria as a nation. Again, the second thing would be to look at land reforms. The government has set up a National Land Reform Commission. They are also working. There's also a committee that is looking at the Land Use Act. Unfortunately, we all know that the Land Use Act is a very tough one because it has to be passed. Any change in the Land Use Act has to go through all the national assemblies of the 36 states, because the Land Use Act is embedded in the Constitution. And before you can make any changes in the Nigerian Constitution, you need to pass those changes through all the 36 state House of Assemblies. But yes, the government is, hopefully, they will push through the strengthening and the streamlining of the legal frameworks related to land ownership. Hopefully, as the Land Reform Commission work and submit their report, there will be a more secure environment for property transactions that will encourage not only investment, but will also encourage development in real estate. The third one will be land title and registration. I talked a little earlier on about the government seeing land more as a revenue head than a factor of production. Many of the governments see land more as a revenue head than a factor of production. And unless the governments understand that production comes with multiple ripple effects and benefits, we'll continue to go around in this circle where even obtaining title to your land is very difficult, and is fraught with a lot of bureaucratic bottlenecks, fraught with bringing so many documents, and at the same time, pretty expensive and something that many cannot afford. Government must be able to begin to make it easier to give people access to obtaining title to their land. And this is not just about this is not just about organizations and so on. I'm talking about the very simple ones. My land in the village, as rural as it may be, I should be able to walk into the nearest Ministry of Lands and be able to register it and walk home with a certificate of occupancy. Unless we get to that stage, we will continue to have a lot of land holding being informal. We'll continue to have a situation where land will continue to be dead capital for a lot of people. We have people who will be sitting on assets, on land that is worth millions of naira, but they will not be able to access it for the mere fact that they cannot register their title. They cannot use that land to go into business. Everything they do will have to be at an informal level. And of course, in trying to, in freeing up the land title and registration process, one of the things that will enable that process be successful is a lot of public awareness and education. The government has to engage and invest in public awareness and education. Let the people, there has to be that synergy. People have to learn to trust that what the government says is what it will do. One of the problems that many governments have today in Nigeria is that of a trust deficit at both state levels, at the local government levels, and I dare say even at the federal level. There's a trust deficit, and everything that these governments do is viewed with suspicion. So if you go now, if the government gets up today and says, we want to make it easy for people to register land title, a lot of people might still not even do it because it will be viewed with suspicion that maybe, okay, they want to take my land away from me forcefully, or this is a means of increasing the tax that I pay on the land. So there has to be major public awareness and education about the need to have formal ownership of land and the benefits, the advantages, how it will enable you free up dead capital, how it will enable you free up the economic value and the potential of your land. And this public awareness and education will then encourage property rights. The fifth one, we go on to leveraging technology. Leveraging technology for land administration. There should be going to digital mapping, blockchain technology, and so on. You know, everything these days is going technology, it's going high tech. Yes, we might say that not everybody will be able to use the devices and so on. But the fact remains that at some point that the government must introduce, the various governments at the state and federal levels must introduce technology in terms of providing property titles, in terms of land administration, and so on. And one state that has gone way ahead of others is Lagos State. Lagos State introduced an e-portal for land transaction in 2024. Early this year, sometime in January, Lagos State introduced an e-portal for land transactions. And it's interesting. From the comfort of your home, you can do land searches, you can do searches, you can search and do due diligence on the land title. You can apply for a CFO, a certificate of occupancy. You can register your title. You can apply for building plans. You can do so much on that e-portal without having to go to the Ministry of Lands or the Ministry of Justice or whatever. No, that's leveraging technology. It will make it so much easier for people to then begin to go apply for title, even things like getting building approvals, which is part of the process of freeing up debt capital. So the government must be encouraged to introduce technology in various ways in their lands departments and so on to ease the application and approval process. Capacity building. Despite all the talk about freeing, about leveraging technology, about public awareness, despite all the talk about land reform, about the Ministry of Finance and land registration and so on, even in-house, in the various ministries and so on, the governments must build capacity. They must build capacity of their departments, of their units, of their parastatals, and the human resource therein. You can do everything that is right, but if the human resource element is wrong, it will mean that the system will continue to have hiccups. So there's a need for serious capacity building in the various Ministry of Lands and every area, every part of the government that deals with land administration. And this includes the fact that the human resource element in those departments must understand their role. They need to understand the role that they play. They need to understand the significance of the job that they do. The fact that you are giving somebody, the fact that a man has come to apply for a certificate of occupancy or a statutory right of occupancy or a deed of assignment, they need to understand the significance of that singular exercise, that they could be freeing up 10, 20, 30, 40 million naira for investment into the economy. And when they look at it in multiples of hundreds or multiples of thousands, you can begin to then imagine the economic impact that will have. So it's not really about just revenue generation. It's also about letting the staff and the people who handle these things in terms of capacity building, letting them understand their role in freeing up debt capital and in their role in invigorating the economic potentials of Nigeria. As I begin to round up, I think the last one will be access to finance, facilitating access to human resources by using formalized land as collateral. Yes, as soon as we begin to get these registrations and so on, the government and begin to try and make it possible for people to be able to use their land, their title property and so on, to go into the market, use them as collateral, use them as equity investments, use them as the equity contribution for investments and so on. So I want to round up now with my conclusion. I've spoken about 40 minutes now. I've talked about debt capital. I've talked about debt capital and the role, the need for the country to begin to seriously look at reinvigorating the potential and the economic potentials of Nigeria with freeing up debt capital. There's a major need. It's not just something that we can kick down the road. It's right now, there is an urgent need. And the country itself, Nigeria, needs a collaborative approach involving not just the government, it will involve communities, it will involve the private sector, it will involve the public sector, it will involve stakeholders at all levels to implement reforms that will unlock this dead capital. Again, I want to take you back to the statistics, because it is when you see those statistics that you really understand how much that we sit on. And when sometimes people say that Nigeria is not exactly a poor country, you can understand where they're coming from. The country has 56,000 abandoned projects. 56,000 abandoned projects, not 500, not 5,600, 56,000 abandoned projects. Some of them as old as 40 years when they were started. The country has tens, 20, 30, 40, tens of thousands of abandoned road projects. Monies have been spent starting these projects. They have gone halfway. Some have gone maybe 50%, some have gone 60%, some have gone 80%, but they have been abandoned. Monies have been tied into these projects. They are neither going forward nor are they coming backwards. The country has over 700 houses, 700 real estate properties worldwide. 700 real estate properties. There's a Nigeria house in Manhattan, New York. Everybody knows it. It's very popular. There's a Nigeria house in Manhattan, New York. It's very popular. But only a few floors in that high-rise building are occupied. The rest of it are empty. Services are poor. And I think many times, even the New York Council has threatened to shut down the building because at some point in time, they cannot provide services. They're not paying certain dues and so on, despite the fact that it's a diplomatic mission and stuff. So there's so much. There's so much. I may not have the full data, but I can also assure you that Nigeria has hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds in accounts that are lying fallow all over the world for various reasons. At the end of the day, the Ministry of Finance Incorporated has its job cut out. The PwC report, the PricewaterhouseCoopers report of 2020, says that we have nearly $1 trillion in debt capital. Maybe internal, maybe external, maybe internal and external. And I want us to put our mind to the fact that if only 25% of this capital, of this debt capital, is put back, is realized and plowed into our economy, you and I don't need to do any arithmetic. We don't need to do too much maths to be able to understand the potential increase in GDP. There'll be an astronomical increase in GDP. Today, our take home, our budget is maybe total revenue for the country is about $25 billion, $30 billion a year. Imagine what it means if 10 times that amount of money is freed up and put into the economy today. The Nigerian economy, I assure you, will begin to rival that of the Asian tigers. And so there is an urgent need for the government to begin to seriously work on freeing up debt capital to help reinvigorate Nigeria's economic potential. The ripple effect will be so much, but for us, in the real estate industry, I assure you that yes, there will be a lot of real estate development, there will be a lot of investment in real estate, there will be a lot of construction and infrastructural projects. These will increase. And in effect, most you know that when the government needs to boost economy, one of the major lines of expenditure is construction, development of infrastructure. Imagine if $100 billion is put into infrastructural development every year in Nigeria. Imagine the ripple effect it will have on the economy. And lastly, what I've talked about the nation, I've talked about individuals. What can we as individuals do in terms of freeing up debt capital? What can we as individuals do in terms of freeing up debt capital? One thing which I have said is that most of the debt capital is lying in the hands of you and I. Land we have in the village, land we have in the cities that have no formal title. You're sitting on land in Lagos, for example, that is worth 60 million, 70 million, 80 million, but you don't have a deed of assignment. You're sitting on land in Enugu or Akure that is worth 10 million, 20 million. You don't have a deed of assignment. You don't have a certificate of occupancy. You have no registered title. You're sitting on dead capital. You can't do anything with it. You can't transfer it. Even if you transfer it, ownership is still, is just informal. All you have is an equitable interest. What do you need to do to free up that debt capital? My challenge to every one of us today is look at your real estate holdings. Which ones don't you have title for? Today is the day to begin to look at saying, hey, I need to get a title to this property. I need to begin to process a C of O. I need to begin to process a statutory right of occupancy. I need to do that because that gives me some serious leverage in terms of ownership on that land. Thank you for listening, and I'm open and I'm still available for questions. So we'll take questions or comments after. Thank you very much. Sojourn, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chudi. That's very, very mouthful, would I say, because listening to all these details that you just reeled out, I cannot but just keep wondering, how we find ourselves here and what steps that we need to take and how far we can actually go in trying to ensure that we free up this debt capital. You talked about quite a whole lot of things, and I mapped out when you talked about the abandoned projects that we have. I mean, nationwide, about 56,000 abandoned projects. You also talked about the big elephant in the room, of course, and one will begin to wonder why it is difficult for us if every year, every 4 years, probably we do what you call electoral reforms, where you talk about you repeal the electoral law to ensure that you get a better
Okay, I think
so I'm sorry for these things happen. Sorry for there's this issue with the network. So I was saying earlier on that one will begin to wonder if we have the electoral reform where we talk about the need for us to begin to get our elections better, and we are not in the past 40 years we have not thought about trying to repeal this land use act. So the whole lot of data that you reeled out, and it's so mind-boggling. All right, so I've had one question already, which is stated there, but before we go on, I'm going to ask one or two questions before we take the questions that we do have here. But again, as many of you who want to be promoted to make some comments, you can be promoted. And as soon as you're promoted, we can allow you to make your comments and discuss and all that. And for the questions that we already have, we're going to take those questions. So let me come back to you. And quickly, I'm coming back to the issue of when you were wrapping up, you talked about what individuals can do with regards to freeing up this debt capital. You talked about having deed of assignment, getting title to your document and all that. How easy is this? Comparing or looking at the challenges of having title document process in Nigeria. I mean, I don't know how much other states in the country. I know for Lagos State, maybe you have a more synchronized approach to title document. But how easy do you think, before we begin to even talk about, now you talk about personal, what we can do in our little spaces to ensure that we free up this debt capital, which I think that is the immediate thing to begin to do for each and everyone who has assets in real estate and all that. But with all the challenges with the state government, how do you think this can be well done? And how do you think, how easy do you think this is? How easy? It's, I mean, I don't want to use the word maybe easier said than done, but how easy do you think this is with the challenges of the state government?
Yeah, it can be, it's, let me put it this way. It's easy. Every state government, the significance of land is beginning to play out before them. So it's becoming, most governments today already have a list of documents that are needed for you to procure your certificate of occupancy, your deed of assignment, or be able to just obtain formal title. One thing I assure you is that it is easy. Many people just have this perception and unfortunate preconceived information that it's very difficult, it's very expensive. I think where people cannot do it themselves, there are professionals like us, like estate surveyors and valuers, who will easily undertake that process for them. I think people should, I think for a lot of us at our individual level, should look more at the beneficial gain or the objective, not the benefit of having a title document to the land. No matter how inconveniencing it may be, it's still a task that every one of us, every individual should undertake. Get titles, get title, get documentation, get formal ownership of your plot of land, of your real estate asset. In terms of pricing, unfortunately, it differs from state to state. But again, one thing I know for certain is that the price is not all paid at once. You can, at least at your convenience, you can process your title document for a year if you want to. As at each stage, there's some amount of money to pay. If you want the survey plans, there's amount of money to pay. When it gets to chatting and so on, there are amounts of money to pay, and buying the form. So it's something that can be done at one's pace and at one's convenience. But I think the essence of this kind of webinar is to impress on people the need and the imperative nature, as it were, the urgency to obtain title to your land. And where you are very busy and you are occupied, you don't want to be going in and out of the Ministry of Lands and the Ministry of Justice, please feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to Ubosi and Co. It's something that we can help you do. These are part of the things that we do. But that's what I would, maybe I would just leave that for now.
All right. I mean, thank you very much. Okay, so I think Mr. Adiniji Adele had asked a question earlier, and I can't see the question up there again. I don't know what happened. If Mr. Adiniji Adele is still there and will be willing to, to make comments, please let me know. Like I said earlier on, if you have anybody who wants to make comment, please don't hesitate to raise your hand so that we can promote you to panelists and can have you make your comments. Let's hope that I can get the question back. But again, the other...
Can I read the question for Mr. Adeni?
Okay, Adeni, please, can you read the question, please? I can't find it.
Yes, thanks. Okay. He said, thanks for the insightful and engaging presentation. What do you think that government should do to bring about a comprehensive reform in the area of land administration, legal frameworks, financial system, and property rights, as well as issue of red tape on corruption in order to unlock debt capital in Nigeria? I don't know if you get that.
Okay, I got that. Yes, I got that. Thank you. Adeniji Adele is the president for Africa in the International Real Estate Federation. So thank you, my president for Africa and the Near East. What will the government do? You know, we've spoken a lot about, we keep saying it. The first thing, I think one of the major criteria, one of the major things that need to be done is a review of the Land Use Act. The Land Use Act is 45 years old this year. It's actually one of the major impediments to real estate development in Nigeria. It's one of the major impediments to construction, to development. So one of the first things we need to do is to review the Land Use Act and make it in line with the realities of today's world. Put it in line with the realities of today's world. 45 years ago, there were no mobile phones. 45 years ago, there was no WhatsApp. 45 years ago, you had to hold physical documents to do transactions. Today, people do transactions without writing one single letter. It's all about exchange of messages and so on. People close transactions, million Naira transactions. So we need a land use decree, a land use act that reflects the realities of today's world. In terms of legal framework, yes. In terms of property rights, red tape, and so on, believe me, I talked about what we call the trust deficit between the government and the governed. Those who govern, the government, and those who they govern. That is the leaders and the people, the leaders and the followers. There's a major trust deficit. When people begin to trust government, when that trust deficit, when that gap is breached, you will see a major increase in terms of people going to seek for formal ownership of their property. It's that trust deficit today that makes it difficult for people to go into government. It's that trust deficit today, is that thing of the government being such a big bureaucratic setting that frightens people from going to the ministry to say, look, I want to obtain a CFO for my land. There must be a lot of education, there must be a lot of public awareness campaign, and it's not something that is going to happen overnight. Please, let me state this very clearly. It's not going to happen overnight. It has to be something that must be done gradually and built on over and over and over. And maybe it will take another 5 to 10 years, but we need to start it. We need to start it. In terms of the red tape and the corruption, yeah, those are things that at the ministries, the governments have to tackle. There must be consequences when people are found to have flouted the law or are found to be taking a bribe or trying to be fraudulent in issuing documents or bringing, even we're not talking just about the government. We're talking also about private individuals trying to use fake documents to obtain title to other people's properties. There have to be consequences. Again, this is where we talk about strong institutions. You know, these things, one thing follows the other. This is where we talk about strong institutions. So the justice system must be very strong to enable even some of this red tape, the legal framework and reforms, and the needs to fight corruption. The justice system must be extremely very strong. And at the end of the day, I talked about capacity building. It's not also just about public awareness for the individuals and the public. There must be capacity building even within the ministries, even within the people who will issue these CFOs, who will facilitate the process of bringing out the CFOs. They must understand their role. Their role in economic development must be made obvious to them that, look, for every CFO that I give, I'm freeing up 100 million that is going into some productive activity. Is that 100 million is going to generate employment for 200, 300 people. The ripple effect the cascade down effect of that 200 people will eventually affect maybe 500 people. That's how they should understand. That's how the workers in the ministry, the human resource element, their capacity should be built to understand that it's not, this CFO is not just a piece of paper. This is a document that has serious economic implications for increasing economic value. My Africa president, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chudi. Let's go to, there's a question from Reverend Chudi Olawepo. I think he practices from Ilorin. He's sending me this question. He says, can we have a uniform process of land titles in Nigeria states? I mean, he's asking if we can have a uniform. I mean, do you want to quickly take that, sir? So,
I think to a large extent we could, but there will be differences in terms of states. To a large extent, the process can be the same, but believe me, even between local governments, it may not be uniform. Even between local governments within the same state, it may not be uniform. And I say this because various states come with different peculiarities. Various states, various ministries and various housing departments and land departments come with their own peculiarities, come with their own conditions. So we may not be able to have some uniformity in terms of, but to a large extent, let us understand that the objective, the final objective, is that we want to give everybody who comes to the ministry a certificate of occupancy or a statutory right of occupancy or some formal documentation to his land that will enable him free up the value of that land and be able to invest it in some economically generating venture.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chudi. While we begin to wrap up, I'm going to ask you two more questions, and if anyone still has questions, please, you can use the chat box. We can still have the privilege of taking your questions, and if you want to just speak and ask Mr. Chudi or make any comment, please just use the raise hand so we can also accommodate you. Mr. Chudi, let me go back to what you said earlier on, and this is going to be more like a more direct question to you. You talked about the fact that we will have less than 10% land that is titled in Nigeria entirely. 10%. In your own opinion, considering the fact that this is an urgent situation, how would you think, what percentage you would think in the next 5 years that if we had moved in that percentage, you would say we're on the right trajectory? Don't forget, we're already 40 years behind. And so, I mean, this calls for urgency. This is really urgent. So I'm asking this question directly to say, I mean, your own opinion, as somebody who has practiced in this space for so long, we've had 10% of land that is titled. How many percent in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years would you consider a right step in the right direction?
All right, so what I would say is that in answering Mr. Adele's question, I talked about the need to go back to increasing to public awareness, capacity building, the need for education and so on. The government, there is no way, let me be very clear about this, there's no way that suddenly, without any of that, people will begin to walk into the various ministries to begin to ask for title to their land. No, the status quo is likely to remain. So believe me, I'm of the opinion that if there is a concerted effort today at public awareness, at public education, if we can increase in the next 5 to 7 years, if we can make the number of titles, we can make the volume of titled land, double it to 20% in the next 5 to 7 years, would have done very well. If we can take it to, we're in 2024 now, say by 2030, if we can comfortably say that the volume of titled land in Nigeria covers 25% of our land area, we would have done very well. It's not, this is something that is almost traditional. People don't trust the government. People don't believe that they need those documentation. Remember that a lot of it is still rural. 70% of Nigerian land is in the rural areas. Only about 30% of our land is, 40% of our land is urban, as we know it also. But 70% of that land is in the rural area. So unless there is some measure of education and public awareness and capacity building in terms of human resource in the various ministries of land and so on, we won't get anywhere. But once that is started, I think in the next 5-6 years, if we take it up to 25%, would have done very well. Thank you,
Mr. Chudi. Please, Moji, can you promote Mr. Remi Ademilua to the panel? He wants to make a comment, but hold on, just put him on the panel whilst I raise one other question that we already have here. I have one question pending, but there's a question from the past chairman of the Lagos branch. So please, Moji, please, can you move Remi Ademilua to the panelist so that he can make his comment? But like I said, just hold on while we take the question from the past chairman of the Lagos branch. And the question of Mr. Bangbola says, thank you for your in-depth presentation, sir. He says, time and processes are the critical issues in freeing up the land title process. What is your opinion on the EC of O process in Lagos? That is EC of O process of Lagos State. Has it been a solution to free debt capital in land titling, considering that the time frame for registration of title in Lagos has increased from the official 20 days to 3 months and now over a year? What should be the ideal time frame recommendation to government? That's from Mr. Dr. Bangbola, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, past president, Lagos branch. The introduction of the EC of O is 2 months old. I think we were all there at the launch about 2 months ago, last week in January. Let me say something. New innovations and things like this take a while to catch on. They take a while to catch on. They take a while to gain traction. So the fact that this has been introduced and maybe it has increased the time does not mean that it's a failure. We must give the government, even first of all, the kudos for introducing this new e-portal. We must give them kudos for that. I'm of the opinion that it can only get better. It can only get better. And as more and more people begin to use it, the government in itself will determine where they have challenges in the use of the e-portal and begin to correct some of those glitches. And then in all this, remember that we all operate with a very, the Wi-Fi, the data that we use is neither here nor there. But most of this thing is what we get from Europe and North America. So we all have those challenges. I think even on this webinar, we've had two or three times the Wi-Fi has dropped off. So those challenges are there. I don't think that that's enough to write off the e-portal. The fact of the CFO period increasing up to 1 year, quite honestly, the Lagos State time frame for obtaining your CFO, your governor's consent transaction, is about 30 days. And I think from submission to obtaining your final document will probably be a matter of follow-up. Unfortunately, there must still remain that process of people going into the ministry to follow up their applications. That process will still be there, knowing some of the bureaucratic bottlenecks that we have. And therein comes, again, my statement where I talked about capacity building, letting the man on whose table that file sits understand that, look, he's not just producing a sheet of paper, a certificate of occupancy. What he's produced is an economic document that will free up a lot of money that will go into production, that will enable the production employ 200 people, and the benefits and the ripple effect of that 200 people will cascade down to maybe 500 people. These are all the processes these are all the things that we need to understand. But for Lagos State and so on, I think e-portal is 2 months old. It's just a start. Also remember that you can still go in there. Some of these things can still be done in hard copy and so on. You can still go in there and submit your documents hard copy. I think for now, I'm not sure when they will stop that process, but I think for now, some of those things can still be done hard copy. Thank you. I don't know whether that answers the question, but that's my response.
Thank you, Mr. Chudi. Right now, let me get Mr. Remi. Can you unmute yourself? And if possible, we can see you. Can you make your comments? Then before I go back to ask Mr. Chudi the other question. Mr. Remi, over to you, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Justin, for the very, I'll say, profoundly insightful session. I'm one of the very strong supporters of Ubosi and Co. And I'm really glad that today's session didn't fail at all. I mean, it's been very insightful. Thank you very much. So I was speaking with someone a while ago, and then we were able to talk about what's going on in the country at the moment. And I asked, I said that, what do you think, in one language, tell us what would be a solution to the present economic situation. He's a CEO of a bank, and he said to me, he said, young man, that if the government can find funds up to trillions of naira and pull it into the economy, that we will be able to get out of this problem. Now, listen out to the data and the statistics that you've pulled out, sir. It's mind-boggling that we actually have such resources in this nation. I mean, it's like a language that we use in practice that will say that you are sitting on money. I mean, it's mind-boggling. So my question is, how can we get our professional body to push insight like this to policymakers? I mean, to people who can to let insight like this gain attention of policymakers. That's my question, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Remy. Thank you for the compliments. Yeah, that's why we hold these webinars, because we look at topical issues and we address them during these webinars. How can our professional body help? We must continue to speak about this issue of debt capital. Yeah, everybody knows that the government is looking for money, Remy. Everybody knows. The government is looking for money. I know that the government is looking for money. The government knows that the government is looking for money. Everybody knows. Now, that's why the Ministry of Finance Incorporated has been created. They have to aggregate Nigeria's assets. For us as a professional body, we must just keep our eye on that ball. Our job is to deal with assets. So even as the Ministry of Finance Incorporated has been created and are aggregating Nigeria's assets from all over the place, we must have more seminars, more workshops about this issue of debt capital. We must begin to let them know the role that we can play. By creating an asset register, we must let them know that we are in the best position to create an asset register. Determining what they want to do with most of those assets, which is basically the role that we can play, which we call asset audit. It's what it can be termed under asset audit. You look at the asset, determine what it can be used for, whether it is still useful. Do you finish it up, or do you sell it in the state in which it is, or do you decide to manage it? Do you decide to continue using it and get some professional facility manager or property manager to manage the asset and so on? We must continue to talk about these things. We would look at asset sales. When they want to sell, there is no other professional that is best suited to undertake that job. We are the ones that sell real estate, not accountants, not lawyers. The lawyers will do the documentation. The accountants will manage the proceeds of the sale. But we are the ones, estate surveyors, that will do the sale, because we are a repository of real estate data in the country. We have all the data. We know what land values are. We know what construction values are. We know what development values are. We know we are the ones that will determine the values of these assets. And that takes me to the last thing that we do. We're the ones that will do the valuation. That's why I wanted to put that. I want to put that as the last one before I go back again. So we are the ones that all these assets have to be valued. You can imagine a project that has been abandoned since 40 years ago, maybe in the 80s or in the 70s. You can imagine the value of that, even if it's just the land. You can imagine the value of the land today. So we as estate surveyors and valuers are best suited to be able to help the Ministry of Finance Incorporated succeed in the work that is put before them. And the only way we're going to do that is to continue to speak about our role, is to continue to hold seminars, is to continue to hold workshops, is to continue to market ourselves to Murphy. And not just Murphy, market ourselves to the government and let them know that they cannot have much success unless we, as estate surveyors and valuers, we are involved in this process. And the current president and even the incoming. Sorry, again, that's what I was talking about Wi-Fi. If one of the directors of Murphy is somebody you know, it's the onus is on you to sell not just yourself, also sell the profession and sell your professional body to him. That way is the way that we will take a rightful place in the job that Murphy has to do for this nation. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, sir.
Yeah, I think it does. I'm sure. One more question is here. I still have one question I wanted to ask you about the big elephant in the big elephant. I'm sure I will still do that. I will still have a couple of minutes to do that. Let me take this question. We have this question from Akinwumi. He said, sir, what is your position on different value declared in the deed of land registration? Since anybody can apply. Did you get that question? What is your position on different value declared in the deed of land registration, since anybody can apply? I don't know if you get that question.
The land values, different values?
Yeah. Yes. Different value declared in the deed of land registration.
No, okay, I think that's what Lekor is trying to ask is what happens. Because maybe I buy the land for 10 million, and then in my document, it's stated that I bought the land for 2 million because I'm trying to reduce the tax that I pay. Unfortunately, I'm sure Lekor himself also knows that even within the ministries, the various ministries of land and so on, they have their own rates. They have their rates. So it doesn't really matter what you put in your document. If you like, you can even put your deed of gift. I say that the property was gifted to you for 1 Naira. They have a statutory rate. They have a fixed rate, ground rent. They have a rate for the land value. So it really doesn't matter what rate you put. The government already has a rate. And that rate, it's never really, we all know, we're in practice, it's never really as high as the open market value. It's never really as high. So whatever the case, the man processing the documents is still at a winning end, still holding the winning end of the stick. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. While as we begin to wind down, I want to go back to what you said about the big elephant in the room. You've talked about what we can do in our individual or private spaces to ensure that we free up debt capital. You've talked about what the government should do. and all of that. But the fact still remains that the big elephant in the room is still the Land Use Act. Sir, I know you've spoken about it. I know you've spoken so much about it, but going forward, sir, do you think that we have the political will as a nation? Because this is going to be the game changer. If you ask me, what to begin to do from our different spaces, what we need to do, the government is looking at the 50, maybe looking at the 56,000 properties where they have it across nationwide, do all of those things. But this is still one of the game changer in terms of the Land Use Act. Do you honestly think we have the political will to address this issue of the big elephant in the house? And if you think so, how do you think we need to go about it? Because we don't have time on our hands. We're already 40, like I said, we're already about 40 years behind. How do you think we can go about this? And from your study of the political space, do you honestly think we have the political will to address this situation?
Yeah. One, let me start from the economic imperative. It's imperative that we address the Land Use Act and review it to reflect modern realities. It's imperative. There's no gainsaying about it. It's imperative. Let me liken it to a man who is on a hospital bed and refuses to take, or let me put it this way, a guy who has a cancerous leg, and the doctors say, look, we have to amputate your leg. If we don't amputate the leg, you will die. But if you're going to live, we have to amputate the leg. So we are at that kind of point. We're at that kind of point in Nigeria. It is imperative we either take a look at this Land Use Act and review it, review a lot of the clauses, a lot of the covenants and sections in reality, in the reality of current times for any meaningful economic development in the country. So that's for it from the economic perspective. Now, whether we have the political will, I think that it's going to require a lot of political dexterity to review the land use decree for a lot of reasons. There are a lot of things I can't say here because a lot of people have different sections of the country have different perceptions of the land use decree. Different people in government have different perception of the land use decree. The governors are happy because it gives them total control over every land in the state. So if Sonjo abuses me, if Remi Ademilua, for example, tomorrow morning abuses me and governor of his state, I can decide that I'm going to revoke his C of O tomorrow morning. And I will just revoke it in the interest of public interest. There's nothing that Remi can do. So for the governors and a lot of people in government, they are happy the way it is. But I think that at the end of the day, the man whom we have at the head of affairs, who is the president of the country, has the political dexterity to see this thing through. I'm very confident that he will see it through, despite the fact that it has to go through all the 36 national state assemblies and so on. I'm very confident because I'm not saying this because I'm not, this is not a political whatever, but I think he understands a bit of economics and a bit of economic development and growth and so on. And he can see, even as president, he can see and he knows and is experienced enough to know that this land use decree must be reviewed. And he's got the political dexterity, he's got the political clout, he's got the political wherewithal to see this thing through. I tell you, if this is one of the few things that he does in his 4 years within his 4-year tenure, the first 4-year tenure, it will be a lasting legacy for him. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chudi. I mean, what else can one say? I mean, from the responses and from the questions and from the contributions, it's obvious that this is a very interesting topic, and not just interesting. It's something that we have to continuously talk about if we are going to ensure that our country will come out of the quagmire that we find ourselves. Thank you so very much for finding time, I mean, to do this with us and for sharing your thoughts from your well experience and understanding on this subject matter. Thank you very much, and we're grateful. And for everyone of you who have joined us today, we're grateful. We want to say a big thank you to you, I mean, for finding time to join this topical issue. I mean, this webinar is hosted by Ubosi and Co. every month, where we come in with topical issues and discuss them. And the essence of this discussion is just to ensure that we contribute our quota to the growth of the economy, and ensure that we do well in the real estate space. The other thing I want to say is that immediately we are going to be, I mean, shortly after the presentation, you can just stay back a while, and you're going to see some of our listings, some of our property listings will show on the video screen. You can just take a look at them. Mr. Chudi also said something instructively earlier on, and when he talked about if you find it difficult in terms of ensuring that your land and your property, your asset, where you need to get title for your asset, this is something that we do in Ubosi and Co. Not just this and much more. So we want to encourage you to please ensure that reach out to us. For as many who are interested in the slides of this this presentation, we can share them. We can share them with you. We can share them with you and let you know and let you have them. If you share us your email addresses, we can share them with you. Thank you once again, and we look forward to having you next month when we'll be coming with another wonderful and topical issue. Mr. Chudi, thank you very much for doing this with us. God bless you. So at this juncture, the webinar is brought to a close. But like I said earlier on, you can stay back for me a few minutes or seconds so that you can see some of our listings. Once again, thank you, and we're excited to have you on this webinar and look forward to having you in the coming months. God bless you and have a wonderful day. Bye for now.
you.